15 years ago, I was a student at the Art Institute, or at the University of New Mexico. This is an image from an artist book that I did while I was there, I think in 1995. You get to a certain age and you get your years mixed up. Yeah. This thing eventually actually became a published book, but long before that it was a series of paintings that I was doing as a sophomore, and it was the first time that I had sort of ventured into slightly cartoonish paintings that were telling stories. The professors and most of the people in the department were much more oriented towards like abstract expressionism, and when I started doing these sort of cartoonish paintings, people were sort of interested, but they really weren't, I don't know, it sort of went around this weird corner and people were not happy with it. So I ended up stopping with the paintings and started doing these drawings, which I then turned into a book. So this story about this two-headed boy where the heads don't get along, and he's trying to figure out how to deal with that. At the same time, like summer of '96, right before I graduated, I was in a band for a little while. I was an artist, not a musician. I had no musical ability whatsoever, so I was the singer. I did some zines while I was in college. This was, I think, the first thing I self-published, and it was just the lyrics from the songs, something to give out at shows. The main thing that I was doing in university was I was a painter, and then the last year and a half or so I was working on my thesis show, which was these kind of giant installations with a lot of found objects and sort of collage and sort of grandiose, kind of dark work. But at the same time, I think the year that I graduated, I have a little sister who was turning 5 that year, and I decided to do a children's book for her 5th birthday. Got about halfway through and finished it for her 6th birthday, at which point I'd been out of school for a year. I had moved to San Francisco, and I was still working on this kind of grandiose installation work, and I remember doing these drawings, these cartoony drawings about this turtle who's trying to get across the country to his sister's birthday party. And there was a voice in the back of my head that was sort of insistently telling me, this is what you're going to do, you're not going to do this other stuff, this is way more fun and way more direct, and this is where the future is. Finishing school, I lost my studio space. One of the things that happens when you leave art school is you lose your audience. Even if you hate your teachers and your colleagues, you at least have somebody who's forced to sit and look at your work and talk about it. And when I left school, I sort of lost the studio. So I worked in my sketchbooks almost exclusively, probably for about a year. And the installation and found object stuff that I was doing and collage sort of entered my sketchbooks, but it sort of ended up butting up with these new little strips that I was doing about these birds eating seeds in the middle of nowhere. So this is sort of an example of all that stuff kind of mashed together.
Would that be your first pigeon strip, do you think?
This was I think the very first one where the birds talk to each other. I actually did the first time the birds appeared was the summer before I graduated. I went to this artist workshop up in the mountains in New Mexico, and it was this kind of we did a bunch of exercises to kind of for image generation or coming up with ideas or whatever. And there was this thing where you were supposed to redraw the same drawing 60 times in an hour. And about halfway through that exercise, I started using each sheet of paper as a panel in a comic. And it was this sort of, it's just a minute to do each thing, so it's real rough. But it's this thing about this soldier who's sort of lost in the middle of nowhere, and he dies, and these birds come down, and a plane crashes. So that's where the birds first appeared, and then I sort of started bringing them into my sketchbooks, and they started talking and telling little jokes and these little gag strips. So that's the first one, and that one is actually in a slightly different form in the book. So I was doing all this different kind of work, but I kept sort of going back to these birds, and eventually I lived in San Francisco for a year, and then I moved back to Minneapolis, where I'm from. And I had sort of accumulated enough of them at this point and was sick of not having an audience, so I decided to photocopy them out of my sketchbooks and make a little book. So it had been very rewarding to do these first couple issues, even though they were super rough. People had seemed to respond to them, and it was super fun, and I decided I wanted to turn this thing into an actual story. So I added these human characters. I decided that there was sort of this question, there's always these birds eating seeds, and I decided, okay, in order to sort of expand the story, I decided to answer the question of where did the seeds come from. So I invented this old woman who clears off her breakfast table every morning, and when she's got a lot of scraps, goes out and feeds them to the birds. The same friend who had cracked up about this comics in the break room at work came on a road trip with me out east. And I remember her reading me a poem about, it was an Edna St. Vincent Millay poem about spring, in which spring is compared to an idiot strewing flowers. And I remember that image kind of sticking in my head, and there's actually a drawing or two in my sketchbooks from that time of that image. And then I'm sure it was a good 6 months or a year later that I came up with this character, but I think it was it was very much connected.
When you came up with the I assume grandmother character, was she going to die from the go, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think right away, having this kind of idiot character, I wanted to sort of follow him once he's sort of out in the world for the first time, experiencing it by himself without any sort of protection or whatever. So I wanted to sort of, I guess really she's kind of like the backstory for him. At this point, I kind of like had these ideas and was really into sort of rediscovering drawing and telling stories, but I really had no idea how comics worked. So the way I kind of approached it at the beginning was to kind of just come up with these images that I found compelling, since I had been I'd gone to school for painting, so it was like what I knew how to do was like make interesting images, or images that were interesting to me, and then I'd get a bunch of them, and then try to make a story to connect them all. I'm doing the next book I do is with Drawing Quarterly. They're going to do a book of my sketchbook strips. So these stories will all appear in that form. But I've also decided that I kind of want to probably do some kind of portfolio or something with these silhouetted images that go along with the stories as well.